bipartisan votes in both chambers. And I am particularly pleased and proud that all four of the Democrats in our New Mexico congressional delegation played such a major role in steering this historic investment across the finish line. There are so many pieces to this bill. The jobs and investments that it will create complement the American Rescue Plan, the major pandemic and economic recovery bill that we passed last spring. And when combined with the Build Back Better Act that we're finalizing as we speak, this infrastructure bill will facilitate major shifts towards a cleaner energy future. I just got back from the International Climate Summit in Glasgow, Scotland, and was really inspired by the level of commitment that I observed from so many leading innovators and policymakers from across the planet. But my clearest takeaway was that we simply can't afford to wait any longer on delivering the kind of investments necessary to safeguard our future. The reality is that New Mexico has long been held back by a systemic lack of investment in our infrastructure. And the pandemic really laid bare the stark realities that too many of our families still lack access to clean drinking water, much less high-speed internet. With the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we will finally be able to change this for so many people across our great state. More than $3.7 billion with a B in formula funding alone will go to New Mexico automatically from the infrastructure bill. And much, much more will be available to the state through competitive funding. I know that each of us here in the delegation are ready to do everything we can to steer as much of that investment to our communities as we possibly can. And I want to describe for you what this will mean for our state and why we fought so hard for so long to see this bill passed. New Mexico is going to receive $2.5 billion alone for federal aid highway apportion programs, and another $225 million for bridge replacement and repairs over the next 5 years. These are absolutely historic numbers for our state. Let me say it again, $2.5 billion for highway apportion programs and $225 million for bridge replacement. These investments will go toward repairing and rebuilding our roads with a real focus on resilience and equity and safety for all of our citizens, including cyclists and pedestrians. New Mexico is going to receive a minimum allocation of $100 million to help provide new and improved internet coverage. Once again, this is just a historic step forward towards bridging the digital divide by working to provide access to the more than 220,000 New Mexicans who currently lack high-speed internet connections. And I'm sure you'll hear more from my colleague, Senator Luján, about this because he fought so hard for these. There's also critical funding to prepare more of our infrastructure for the costly impacts of climate change, extreme weather events, and even cyber attacks. New Mexico stands to receive $38 million over the next 5 years to protect against wildfires and $13 million to protect our infrastructure against cyber attacks. I worked really hard to make sure that this package included support specifically for community wildland defense grants, mechanical thinning and prescribed fire in our forests, and the collaborative forest landscape restoration program that has such a proven track record in our state, but hasn't had the level of funding to meet the need in the past, and that's about to change. Families across New Mexico will also benefit from the bill's historic $3.5 billion national investment in weatherization programs, which will reduce the cost of energy bills for many of our families. The cheapest, cleanest energy is the energy we don't need to use in the first place. And New Mexico is going to benefit greatly from this important program. New Mexico will also receive $355 million over the next 5 years to improve water infrastructure, to get us closer to ensuring that clean, safe drinking water is a right in all of our communities. As part of this, I fought hard to secure the full federal funding share for the Eastern New Mexico Rural Water Project, which will provide a sustainable water source for places like Clovis and Portales, and even safeguard the future of Cannon Air Force Base. This is a huge deal for communities that can no longer rely on the rapidly falling Oglala Aquifer for their future water needs. I also made sure that we secured $3.5 billion nationally to address the backlog of water infrastructure projects under the Indian Health Service Sanitation and Facilities Construction Program. New Mexico can also expect to receive $38 million over the next 5 years to support a major expansion of the electric vehicle or EV charging network in our state. We will also have the opportunity to apply for the $2.5 billion in additional grant funding dedicated to EV charging in this bill. We are electrifying the light-duty transportation sector as we speak and supporting the domestic manufacturing jobs that will come from dominating the rapidly growing global EV market. Overall, this new infrastructure law will create hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs all across our country and ensure that our nation's infrastructure meets our 21st century needs. To put it in perspective, this bill puts our infrastructure spending on par with what we saw during the New Deal. And when we pass the Build Back Better Act, we will actually exceed the level of infrastructure investment that occurred during the New Deal. The Build Back Better Act is also going to make pre-K and childcare more affordable for every single family, and it will save New Mexicans money on their health care and prescription drug costs. And it will all be paid for by making the wealthiest earners and large corporations finally pay their fair share. This is our moment to build back better. This is our moment to meet the challenges that we will be judged by our children, our grandchildren, and future generations. And I am so proud to be in a congressional delegation that recognizes the stakes of what we face. And I am so proud of all that we are delivering to the families and communities in our great state. And with that, it's my honor to introduce my colleague, my friend, someone who did so much to focus on tribal communities, to focus on internet, the basics that mean so much for the state of New Mexico, Senator Ben Ray Luján.
Senator Heinrich, thank you so very much for all of your work and for bringing us together. It's an honor to be here not only with our senior Senator Martin Heinrich, but with United States Representatives Ledger Fernandez and Stansberry to talk about this historic piece of legislation that I was proud to help shape for the people of New Mexico. From tackling the climate crisis head on to expanding broadband access and providing a much needed boost to small businesses, this bipartisan legislation pushes our country forward at the right moment, precisely when help is needed the most. Critically, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act takes historic steps to put an end to drunk driving with the inclusion of my RIDE Act, legislation I authored that will require advanced drunk driving technology in all new vehicles, so no more families have to endure the headache and the heartache and the challenges, the frustrations of losing a loved one. As someone that was hit head on by a drunk driver almost 20 years ago, I know the importance of getting this legislation adopted. I'm so honored that we were able to work with Rick Scott out of Florida to get this included. This legislation also includes my REGROW Act, legislation I authored to clean up the thousands of orphan and gas wells that leak methane and pose serious health risks to our communities. This is an issue that I've been working on since March of 2020 as a member of the House leadership. I'm proud that the bipartisan infrastructure legislation contributes over $4 billion to plug these abandoned wells and safeguard our environment. Building off legislation that I introduced with Senators Heinrich and Sinema, this bill makes a significant $3.5 billion investment for Indian Health Service for water and wastewater projects. And for New Mexicans, affordable broadband can make all the difference for students completing their homework, an entrepreneur starting an online business, or even families seeking telehealth services. Across the board, this legislation will make robust investments to our state and make internet access more affordable for more than 785,000 New Mexicans. In addition to the build out that Senator Heinrich talked about, New Mexico will receive an estimated $750 million for both the build out and the affordability component. This is game changing, and it's why we need to make sure we're working closely in our beautiful state to build out internet access to every corner of New Mexico. This much needed legislation represents a monumental investment in the future of New Mexico and our country. But now it's critical the United States Senate presses forward to finish the job and deliver the Build Back Better Act for the American people. The Build Back Better Act provides once-in-a-generation relief to lower the everyday costs that burden working families, from healthcare to childcare. It also makes the largest investment to combat the climate crisis in U.S. history, investing $555 billion over the next 10 years. With such remarkable progress made in the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, it's vital the Senate builds on the success and continues to invest in the future of our country that recently passed the House. That's why I'm eager, Senator Heinrich and Representative Stansberry and Legislator Fernandez, to continue working together with my colleagues to make sure we get this legislation across the finish line. And Senator Heinrich, before I pass it over to you, I think it's also important to note that while this legislation was bipartisan, earning the support of Democratic and Republican colleagues in both the House and the Senate, including Mitch McConnell, it was only the four of us, the four Democratic members of the New Mexico delegation, that voted for this legislation. Unfortunately, our Republican colleague that represents the Southern District did not see the importance of passing infrastructure legislation to make investments in every corner of our state. One thing that I learned from Manuel Luján and Pete Domenici, you got to work together and you have to make investments in New Mexico because everyone needs access to job opportunities, but we have to invest in our state. So thank you, Senator Heinrich, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Senator. And that's a great point because, you and I learned that, some of the things that Senator Domenici started, like the Eastern New Mexico Water Project, it was up to us to finally get those across the finish line and complete those commitments to every corner of our state, Republican, Democrat, independent, tribal, it doesn't matter. That's what producing results is all about. And speaking of results, it's my honor to introduce someone who's already producing results for our great state, Congresswoman Melanie Stansberry.
Well, thank you, Senator Heinrich, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Good morning. It's an honor to be with our amazing delegation here today and to talk about the importance of passing this infrastructure bill. I want to re-emphasize some of the points that were made because this bill is so crucial for New Mexico. On Friday, the House passed a $1.2 trillion package of infrastructure that will invest over $3 billion in New Mexico alone and invest in thousands of jobs that will impact communities across the state of New Mexico. And in particular, I want to highlight four pieces of this legislation. First, broadband. We all know that many New Mexicans across our state, especially in our rural and tribal areas, do not have access to broadband. Broadband is foundational to having a thriving economy, for our kids to be able to succeed in school, and for us to just go about our daily lives. We desperately need those investments in broadband. Our state is poised and ready to put those dollars to work, and we must make sure that every New Mexican can connect to high-speed broadband all across the state. Secondly, I want to highlight the provisions around water. Many of our communities across New Mexico are experiencing crises around water. We have a number of chapters of the Navajo Nation where we have Diné communities where people do not have access to clean drinking water, including in our House district in the 1st Congressional District at Tohajile chapter just west of Albuquerque. We desperately need to put these dollars to work for our rural communities, for our tribal communities, and all over the state. That includes rural communities up north, our colonias down on the south, and everywhere that we can put those dollars to bring clean drinking water to our state. The third piece I want to emphasize is the clean energy infrastructure. As was just stated, Senator Heinrich was representing our delegation in the Glasgow climate negotiations that are happening right now. And it is so important that we show the world and the country that we mean business in terms of meeting our climate agreements and that we are going to address our carbon footprint. Investing in clean energy infrastructure, our grid, our energy and our vehicle infrastructure is crucial to actually addressing our carbon footprint and making good on those promises to addressing the climate crisis. And fourth, I want to emphasize roads. You know, across New Mexico, all of our communities have roads that are unpaved, that are dangerous, that need attention. And this is especially important in our rural and tribal communities. This bill will bring over $2 billion to our rural communities and our tribal communities so that we can pave roads, we can fix bridges, we can make sure that we can get to where we're needing to go. So those are such important pieces of this legislation. But I also want to highlight the Build Back Better Act, because we're only halfway done. So the rest of this agenda is the American Families Plan. It's the proposal that our president and the Democratic caucus have put forward to not only invest in the physical infrastructure of our country, but the social and family infrastructure of our communities. So that's addressing the well-being of our communities, addressing healthcare needs, expanding healthcare, investing and creating the first ever universal pre-K system the United States has ever seen, investing in caring for our elders, investing in the largest ever commitment to addressing the climate crisis and climate resilience that the United States has ever made, and ensuring that our communities can live with dignity, well-being, and that we can help the next generation of New Mexicans thrive. And that is what the Build Back Better Act does. That is why we're going to return back to Congress next week and hopefully pass it out of the House and get it across the finish line in the Senate and get it to the president's desk, because we know that if we pass these two bills, they will literally transform lives, not only in New Mexico, but across the country. And so we are so proud to represent our communities and to serve you all. And with that, I want to pass it back to Senator Heinrich and on to my amazing colleague from the North, the great Congresswoman Teresa Ledger Fernandez. Thank you.
Well, I love how Senator Luján decided to like have the backdrop of New Mexico roads. And as a member of Congress, there's no one who knows the roads of northern New Mexico better than Representative Teresa Ledger Fernandez. She covers that huge swath of country and beautiful communities every single week. And Congresswoman, take it away and tell us what's this going to mean for New Mexico and for your constituents?
Well, thank you so much, Senator, and thank you to our wonderful Representative Stansberry. And our senators are amazing in the manner in which they worked on the Senate to get this done. You know, and I was very proud to join my hermana in the House to get this out and to tee everything up for some amazing change, improvement for everybody. I also want to thank the press for the work that you're doing to bring the news to New Mexicans about what's down the pipeline. And pipelines are something we're going to be working on, water pipelines. So this is transformational. You keep hearing us use that word, because it is the largest investment that we've seen in our infrastructure, and our communities cannot win, cannot thrive if we don't do this. And this act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is a win for every community across New Mexico. So as Nuevo Mexicanos, we know the devastation brought on by climate change, from less water for our sequias to damaging wildfires and droughts. It's clear to us that we need a just transition with the necessary investment to create those good paying jobs for our communities, especially our legacy fossil fuel communities that powered our country for generations. I'm proud to have helped secure, alongside our senators, and especially Senator Ben Ray Luján, $4.7 billion to plug orphaned wells and reduce methane pollution. Plugging these orphan wells, which are littered across our northwest and southeast, plugging these orphan wells will create hundreds of well-paying jobs in our state and thousands across the country. We know that methane is more than 25 times as harmful as carbon dioxide to global warming, and we must do all we can to reduce its negative impact. So we have to do more on climate. And that's why you hear us all also advocating to pass the Build Back Better Act. And that's because the Build Back Better will include key pieces of my Orphaned Wells Cleanup and Jobs Act to establish an idled well fee and strengthen bonding requirements so that we can finally hold fossil fuel companies accountable so they don't leave us with a mess, so they don't create more abandoned wells. I also advocated for investment in our water infrastructure because it's simply unacceptable that 10 million American households and 400,000 schools and childcare centers don't have safe drinking water. Our communities have a right to safe drinking water. Now, New Mexico will get close to $355 million over the next 5 years to drill the wells, bury the pipes, and build a clean water infrastructure all across our state. The bill also includes funding to complete the Navajo-Gallup Water Supply Project as currently authorized. With this funding, the Navajo-Gallup Water Supply Project will bring drinking water to chapter houses and residents in Gallup and its surrounding. I joined the senators in applauding the full funding for the Eastern Water Project, which we pushed for in the House and have now included in the infrastructure bill. You know, as we've noted, the delegation or the Democrat members of the delegation pushed for these projects with our colleagues in the House, and we now see what are the results of effective advocacy of the Democratic delegation in DC. We also know that too many New Mexicans live in areas where there is no broadband, and broadband is an essential infrastructure. During the pandemic, our rural Navajo and Native American students couldn't attend school virtually and instead had paper lessons delivered by school bus, no teacher interaction, just a bus drop. Without broadband, those living in our rural communities on the Navajo Nation and other tribal communities across New Mexico missed out on critical telehealth services and the resources to keep their small businesses open. I'm a proud member of the Rural Broadband Task Force, and I applaud the funding we secured for New Mexico, which will receive $100 million to help provide broadband coverage. New Mexico is a rural state, and I am proud that the broadband funds will especially help our rural and low-income communities. So every household, regardless of income, can have access to broadband. The infrastructure bill also has $12 billion for Native American infrastructure for climate resiliency, housing, roads, and Indian health facilities. I chair the subcommittee of Indigenous communities, and this bill includes many of the priorities we identified in hearings we held at the committee. And I'd like to note that Representative Stansberry is also a member of the Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples and also pushed for these. And then we had over in the Senate, our colleagues saying we must do it. And it's when the House and the Senate work together like that, when our colleagues work together across the two chambers, that we get such great results. So all of these investments are life-changing for our state, but there's more to be done. For generations, New Mexico families have been held back by the costs of healthcare, childcare, pre-K. They've been held back by the high cost of prescription drugs because we continue to let Big Pharma make excessive profits off of people's pain. You want to know how we get our rural communities, tribal communities, and all of our communities back to work? Now, how do we do that? We do it with paid family leave, with affordable childcare, with universal pre-K. We do that. We get everybody getting back to work in our economy humming with the Build Back Better Act, because we must create jobs. We must also create an economy where people can go to work and know that their loved ones are taken care of. Now's the time to invest in the values and heart of our nation. And those are our women, our children, our workers, our immigrants, and our beautiful Mother Earth. The infrastructure bill is just the first step. We're committed to passing the Build Back Better Act because it's para la gente. It's for our community. Thank you once again for taking the time to cover this.